Hey folks, this is a short video for American literature. We are just going to talk through the definition of realism. It is on, I'm going to work off of the course terminology link in D2L first. If you scroll down to the R's, you will see realism right there. This is the first big umbrella literary genre, literary movement. This course covers three. They are realism, which runs roughly in the United States from the 1860s. People point to the Civil War, and then it runs in the United States to the 19-teens. People point to once World War I is over in 1918, realism is over, somewhere in the 19-teens. So you're talking 1860s to 19-teens in the United States. It's often figured a little bit earlier in Europe, from say the 1850s to 1910, something like that. Realism is a response to the movement that came before it, that is Romanticism. We'll get into that in just a second. But let's start right here with the basic definition that's in D2L. Realism is a literary movement in Europe and the United States, North America, that was dominant from approximately 1850 to 1900. That's the European time period. Ours is a little bit later, jump ahead a decade. Realistic writing deals with pragmatism, and what pragmatism means here is practical, not emotions, not feelings, but practical causes and practical effects, results, consequences, those kinds of things. And the truth it seeks to find and express is relativistic or pluralistic. That means that a lot of realism is devoted to the idea that it is connected to one person's reporting of a fact. It's relative to the person observing it and the relative truth of their observations. It's associated with discernible consequences and verifiable by experience. Realistic writing often focuses on the immediate and the here and now. It often makes you feel like you're right in there, like it's just reporting events as they happen. And on specific actions and their consequences, as I said, as well as common everyday experiences. This is one of the things that realism is about, it is about middle and lower class experience versus Romanticism, which often romanticized the experiences, especially of the upper and upper middle class. Realism is much more oriented towards middle class. What a realist would tell you are common everyday experiences experienced by common everyday people. If we jump over here, you can see realism. Realism is not restricted to literature. It is a movement in art, theater, cinema, the early cinema, opera, all kinds of things. Realism, sometimes also called naturalism, and we'll talk about naturalism as another definition unto itself, but naturalism is often under the umbrella of realism. It's a part of realism that is really becomes really prominent and important in the 1890s, the 1900s, and for about 25 or 30 years. Is generally the attempt to represent subject matter truthfully without artificially and avoiding artistic conventions or implausible, exotic, and supernatural elements. Again, it often feels like you're reporting common everyday experiences in this straightforward, almost journalistic or scientific reporting of facts and experiences and causes and consequences. We skip down here to the literature section. You can see broadly defined as a faithful representation of reality. So it's a literary movement based on objective reality and the idea that there is some objective reality that is discoverable and reportable. It is connected to philosophers like René Descartes and Locke, as they tell you in here. The preceding Romantic era, and if you're not familiar with the Romantic era, which comes before this class, Romanticism was popular from the 1790s into the 1850s, especially in places like Germany and France. Our most famous American Romantic is probably Edgar Allan Poe. You can see realism as this pushback against this romanticized, emotional writing. The Romantic era was a reaction against the values of the Industrial Revolution. The realistic writing was very much connected to a lot of the scientific discoveries of the second half of the 20th century. Darwin's Origin of Species, electricity. It's very much this pushback against the romanticized ideas about feelings and the human soul and the human spirit, and it is this push back towards this sort of scientific discovery and reporting of straightforward objective reality. Realism was in turn a reaction to Romanticism, and for this reason it is also commonly referred to as traditional bourgeois realism. It is this straightforward, it often feels at least like straightforward reporting of facts. The people that are, the writers that are under the realism umbrella on our syllabus are Ambrose Bierce, Kate Chopin, Jack London, and Stephen Crane are the two big naturalists of realism. We'll talk about them in a different definition. Charlotte Perkins Gilman, those, and Upton Sinclair. Upton Sinclair is kind of a bridge figure. He comes in at the very end of realism. You can sort of feel realism coming to an end in the work of Upton Sinclair, but for our purposes, he's under that umbrella too. That should give you a basic introduction to realism. You can read more about it. I'm happy to connect you to more realistic resources. The most famous realistic writer is not on our, American realistic writer is not on our syllabus, and that's Mark Twain. Mark Twain, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Mark Twain is very clearly by far and away the most famous literary figure of the realist period. If you've got questions or need more information about realism, just be in touch with me and I'll be happy to share them with you. I hope that's useful to you.